This is Prey, and we're going to talk level design. I have to spoil the first plot point of the game, so if that's going to bother you, turn away. Alright, Prey has really good level design, and I thought I would show you in a long video, discuss the various techniques that they used. People have called it BioShock in space. It is not. It bears some visual resemblance to BioShock because it uses the same kind of over-the-top Rococo designs, but the actual game is System Shock 2 inspired. And that's fine. I enjoyed System Shock 2 considerably more than any of the BioShocks. So let's talk about it. Where are we? We're in the Transtar lobby. This Transtar lobby area is designed for us to actually be able to... for humans to actually be able to work here. It's designed around people doing stuff in this area. It's almost incidental that we are now running through here fighting aliens. This is an unusual approach. This kind of open design is really rare. The reason is because you have to give up almost all player control. The point of an area like this is to get people that walk in to wherever they're trying to go with the minimum amount of fuss. That's almost exactly the opposite of the point of a normal level, which is, you know, player goes from point A to point B and there's stuff between. This is far more open, and everything can happen here. Things can just unfold willy-nilly. The player can explore anywhere they want. It's chaos, total chaos, and it is. And that's fine. That's actually very, very powerful if it suits your game. Some games do need a linear set of levels, but some games would really benefit from a much more open set like this one. Let's actually talk about some of the design elements that went into this, and we're going to basically cover them in whatever order I happen to stumble across them in. Let's go ahead and get started. First off, this is the plot spoiler. This game about shooting space aliens in space takes place in space. Yay! The only problem is this reveal is not very good. You're supposed to be blown away. Like, oh my gosh, we're in space! Except, literally 5 minutes ago, you were shown that they have the technology to fake this. Like, trivially. So it does not feel like we're in space. It feels like someone's showing us a picture of space. System Shock 2 had the opposite approach. They showed you a picture of space, and then you went through a decompression event. That was great. You really feel like you're in space because, holy shit, you're about to be fired out a hole in the hull. Well, let's continue on. The only way to get down off of this platform is to either jump and break your knees, or to take the staircase. This staircase is the only way down, so the devs are pretty sure that they know where you're going to be going and where you're going to be looking at any given point in time. So they actually do have a scripted event, a decompression event. The stuff blows out there. You're not going to see it because it already happened. It's not really as good as a System Shock decompression event. It could have still been punched up. It doesn't feel like it actually happened. No one acknowledges it or anything. If one of the pieces of debris had hit the screen and cracked it from the other side, that would have felt much more cool. But the biggest problem with it is that I wasn't looking at it. Because you see, this has already been scouted. I've been looking down from up here very carefully because I'm worried about the various monsters. And like, okay, well that looks pretty clear. Oh, what's this? Oh, there's an event that's half over. So if you think that you know where the player is looking, realize that you might not. This happens a lot in Prey. Prey often assumes I've seen something that I didn't. Maybe that's just because I'm not playing it like the ordinary gamer would. Who knows? But a lot of the time, I feel like Prey is seeing things that I'm not seeing. So the biggest question you might have is, how can you be sure where the player is looking? How can you prep for an event? How can you make an event happen in a way that will guarantee that the player sees it? Well, how can you tell where the player is looking? My health is a little low. Did you see that? I wonder where I'm looking. If the player has to interact with something, then you know that they're going to be looking at it. There's your answer. So if you want to have an event that happens based on whether the player is looking at a specific place at a specific time, if it relies on the player looking in a specific direction, just have them interact with something in that specific direction. Another big option is to have it unfold slowly. For example, you might have a window that slowly, a barricade that slowly opens, and on the other side of some bulletproof glass, you see a monster eating some scientist. That also works because it unfolds very slowly and is loud. Anyway, the hub here is this H-shaped room with this giant set of windows, and then this hallway is filled with an elevator, and then on the far side is another wide set of stairs. And you can actually see that if you look here. There's the H-shaped room. This is a typical approach for open levels. You generally use a lot of verticality because otherwise it's a little bit tough to have the density you need. The core principle of these open areas is that there has to be landmarks that you keep coming back to. And the more landmarks there are, the more difficult it is for the player to really feel like they're connecting with any given area. By limiting yourself to one central area, it feels very natural. You can really get a sense that you're returning to this place. Little by little, you're conquering it. You're cleaning it out. You're learning it inside and out. And that's a very powerful technique. But that technique falls apart if it's a flat area and then there's like one square that has giant flying balls in it and another square that has, a lucite hallway and stuff like that. I'm saying that the most recent Deus Ex game had too many flat areas, and you couldn't feel like connected with them quite as fast. It took a long time to warm up to any of the given districts in the Deus Ex game because each of the districts was wide and flat. On the other hand, if you use verticality, it's easy to get enough density in here. You just stack it. That said, this goes a lot better if the player understands why this place exists. So, why does this place exist? Well, this is the entrance to the space station. The shuttle bay comes out, people will come storming in, they come up here like, "Hello, I have an appointment with Dr. Frog." Great. This is really well designed. Bathrooms, orientation, museum. Stairs clearly visible and marked. So the biggest problem I have with this is that there is some lack of realism in that there is no elevator up to any of these elements on the top of the stairs. Maybe gravity is low or something, but generally speaking, you would have an elevator in these situations. This elevator does not actually serve those locations. It's odd, but you probably didn't notice, so it's not too bad. One of the things that I really like about this kind of open system is that open level is that it feels like it's lived in, like it exists for something other than your own violent amusements. But unfortunately, that also breaks if I feel like it wouldn't actually make any sense. Like if I put up with walking up 4 flights of steps to my office every day. That's a lot. The other problem with this is that the room is clearly split into 2 T-shaped rooms because the back end of this and the front end of this look so different that I didn't realize they were part of the same column. So when I first came down here and I moved through one of these side rooms, I didn't realize that there was one main area. I thought there were 2 separate areas. It was only a mild mistake that I quickly figured out, but the point is you're gonna feel lost in this kind of open level. That's not necessarily bad. The player feeling lost, like they're exploring someplace they don't fully understand, is something you can use. If that's what you need in your game, then this is the right way to get it. So, what are some concrete tips on how to actually put gameplay into a level like this? Well, in System Shock 2, they actually designed the levels to be a useful space station, or a useful starship, before they even put in the gameplay. And it made them feel really realistic, and it also made them stretch to try and fill all of these rooms with stuff, vignettes, levelettes, whatever you want to call them. So what they would do is they would take like a stretch of 24 almost identical rooms, and they would break them into groups by using holes in the walls or themed enemies or whatever else I could think of. And it would work out pretty well. You would feel like you go in there, you clear a little bit, you come back out, you have conquered a small amount of this region, go on to the next one. We have a lot more options today, and this particular area is obviously not designed quite that realistically, but it does have some of the same philosophies behind it, and it's clearly inspired. So what sort of fundamental level layouts can we expect? Well, we're going to have a lot of leaf elements. For example, those bathrooms. You're going to go into the bathrooms, you're going to come back out of the bathrooms. It's not expected that you're going to go on a grand bathroom adventure. If you find a hole between the bathroom and another room, you're going to be like, whoa! It's going to be unexpected and surprised, because the expectation is that that's a dead end. Sometimes you might actually be able to go through. For example, employee orientation, you can just go all the way through it. There's the bathrooms again. So that's a little bit disorienting, but it's also very powerful. You don't have to stick entirely to dead-end rooms, and shaking it up a little bit is going to be a huge advantage. It's going to be very powerful if you can work it in. You want to have a variety of things going on, because otherwise it's going to feel very repetitious. Now, another basic technique you're going to want to use is manipulating the space around the player. The most basic, fundamental space is height and width. So let's take a look at height. This is the height, right? So when we go into the bathroom, what happens? Well, first we neck down through this door, right? So that's got a lower height. Then we're in the bathroom. The bathroom's ceiling height is actually the same as the height here, but it's got this massive drop element that brings the ceiling down even further. These kinds of flat, lowered lighting elements compress the space down below what it seems like it should be, and so the height is lower than it was outside. So we came through a neck down the door, and then we're in a smaller space, a shorter space than we were outside. We go through another neck, this one's even shorter, and then we're in the bathroom. The bathroom doesn't have any drop lights, but it does have ever smaller areas to explore. By adjusting the height, just nothing else, just adjusting the height and the perceived height of the area, we can make the player feel like they are definitely going into a place that's more and more tense. It's a very, very basic, fundamental approach. Another thing is the width, the size of the walls, the size of the floor before it hits the walls. How much space do we have in a given room? Well, this goes from being a wide open area to being a hallway that's fairly open to being a hallway that's quite closed. And then as we walk into the bathroom, it gets closer and closer and closer. And then when we're actually here, these were closed when I first got here. So opening them, it's even more closed. So by compressing the space down horizontally as well as vertically, you can get even more control over how the player should feel. This is a great and fundamental set of techniques. You should use it whether you're doing an open plan or more A to B linear style. But either way, it's not all there is. There's also the way in which you block off the movement of the player and their eye line. So using these kinds of corners is a great way to raise tension, because the corners are going to make the player pretty nervous. So by blocking off the player's line of sight using things like these corners, you can really make the player, take a second to take a look. And that'll just give you a little pulse of tension. If we want to take a look back here, I showed you this room before. It's the through room. And as you can see, it's a wide open room with a fairly high ceiling, but it's got all sorts of overturned debris. In most games, that wouldn't be a big deal, but in Prey, the enemies can disguise themselves as everyday objects. So when you come in here, you're like, oh crap, there could be like 400 enemies. There were, in fact, 4. But the point is that this was quite tense, more tense than in an ordinary game. In an ordinary game, you could look in here and you could say, okay, I'm pretty sure there are no enemies in here right now. Maybe there will be enemies in here later, or they might ambush me as I walk through, but I'm pretty sure there are no enemies in here now. But in Prey, you're like, holy shit, is that book an enemy? How about that book? oh no, I revealed myself. And it's a much more tense situation. So depending on the kinds of enemies you face, you're going to find that different kinds of layouts feel differently. In most games, this layout would not have felt as high tension, but in Prey it feels very high tension. Also, Prey has a number of annoying Z-fight glitches, like a lot, and I'm presuming that's not on purpose. Who knows? I haven't really gotten that far in the game. Maybe there's another reveal later. Another technique you can use is theming. So, for example, this bathroom has been closed off by a giant wall of gloop. Even though the two bathrooms are almost identical, the men's and the women's bathrooms are basically the same, they use all the same assets, we have now understood that there is some story happening here. We've had to knock away a huge pile of gloop. What in the world is going on? Oh my gosh, there's a dead guy over there. And there is a very, very oddly placed lamp. I bet that's a monster. No, it's not. For some reason, he dragged a lamp in here with him. Well, whatever. The point is that this layout is exactly the same, but it feels very unique and different because we were brought in here with a story in our minds. Something was hinted at. We were told there was something unusual going on in there, and the lights are flickering and all that stuff. So it was a lot more tense, even though the same exact assets were used. And that's the sort of thing that System Shock 2 did. When it had like 24 identical rooms, it would break holes in the walls or drop an elevator on one of them or whatever, just to try and make sure that you never felt that those identical rooms were actually identical. There was always some kind of vignette, some kind of miniature story being told. Now, an interesting choice on the part of the devs here is that these staircases are completely separate. In most games, the staircases would lead up to shared second and third stories. But in this case, each of these staircases leads up to 2 rooms on each floor, and that's it. No giant walkway across the second floor with 100 rooms in it or anything like that. I think that was probably a good call. It does make it feel a little bit unrealistic, but in general, you get the feeling that this area is large, but there's not so many rooms that you actually feel like you're being overwhelmed with endless identical offices. So, even though this has a second and third floor, what it actually has is vertical hallways. This is not really a second and third floor. This is just a hallway with 4 rooms. Another 2 up here. Rather than forming any kind of complicated loops with the other staircase. And that's a good way to think about it. You don't have to create an endless number of loops, because the primary purpose of this sort of layout is to have the player go out into some little set of rooms, some levelette, and then conquer it, and then come back to the hub. If you have giant loops, then the player isn't going to return to the hub as smoothly. They're going to feel a lot more lost and overwhelmed. So it's a good idea not to create too many loops. That said, you can actually move from one side to the other. It's pretty easy. But you don't have to, and it feels like it's a fun cheat. So that's not really invalidating what I'm getting at. Another cute trick here is a lot of the times, rather than just having a flat wall, they will put in a window that lets you see quite far. That obviously does require you to have enough assets and enough, computational power to render all of that crap. But it is a very powerful way to make the world feel a little bit larger and more interesting, rather than just closing it off all of a sudden. That's another basic technique. Well, let's return back to the idea of ceilings, because this is something that doesn't get a lot of play in an average game. First off, out here, you can see we have a giant, giant ceiling, but it's immediately walled down into this much, much cozier ceiling. So it doesn't feel like we have a huge amount of space above us. That raises our tension slightly because we've been moving up in this place where there's a quite high ceiling, and now we are in a ceiling that's noticeably lower. We go through a neck here into a more open area. Now, I don't know whether this is on purpose or not. I'm going to assume so. The idea of bringing the ceiling down and then pushing it back up is a really great way to add a lot of impact to this area. This area feels like it's much more impressive than if it was just going to be a high ceiling the whole way. Now that said, it doesn't really make any sense, but it's still, you know, pretty good. One of the things they do is they have these ledges where the doors are used, and I think this might actually be the only reason they did this, because I think that what happens is this door is actually on the edge of a block, a level tile, and so what they've got is, you can actually see the Z fighting. See? So what they've got is they've got a level tile that just happens to be this shape. And if they want to merge it in with a room that's got a higher ceiling, they can't get rid of that shape. But happy coincidence, it works really well to make this room feel very, very impressive. Now, if we go from this high ceiling into here, ooh, you can see that we lose a lot of height. There's no reason for it, except that we should have a lower ceiling for tone purposes, so that's fine. Not only do we lose height, we have this drop light here that presses us down even further, like in the bathroom area. You can take off more height by having light fixtures that come down. Notice the difference between this kind of pushing light fixture and this kind of floating light fixture. This doesn't appear to make the room smaller. It appears to make the room larger. This makes the room feel smaller and cozier. Also, there's a shift towards red with the walls and stuff like that. So all told, you should feel like this is a much more cozy spot, and also probably much more dangerous. And I know that when I first came in here, I was like, is there a monster? Should I jump over the desk to try and ambush the monster, or should I walk around? And of course, there was no monster, but it still made me nervous, and therefore that is very valuable. Once again, they have one of these windows that opens up into a vast area. It feels like it makes this office larger. Quite well done. Over here, we have the same exact office, but rather than repeating, they completely changed it out with damaged versions of many of the components. All of these assets are reused from other places on the space station, and there's nothing unique about them. You're just arranging them to fit a different story. So this office is not a fully functional office. The dude just moved in, whereas this is one that's been around for a while. Same geometry, different story. Come around here to the desk, and you can still feel that this place is nice and open. You're not feeling threatened. Everything feels quite fine. You might feel a little bit nervous when you come into this desk area because the ceiling is suddenly quite low, but I think that's on purpose. I think they wanted you to feel a little bit nervous, but not enough to really feel like you were under pressure. Just enough to give your tension a little bit of a boost, because when you come through here, the ceilings are enormous. So I think the whole idea with this layout was you're coming up into these increasingly cramped spaces, and by now you've been exploring things like bathrooms, and then suddenly you have this huge decompression where things just keep getting bigger and wider and taller. And oh my god, this is my office? The ceilings are incredibly high. The walls are transparent. They're made out of either glass or just random wooden shafts. There's a massive window looking out over everywhere you've been. All told, this area shouldn't feel very threatening at all. I mean, it probably feels some threatening because you're in a game where there is threat, but it's not like you're crawling through an air duct or creeping into a bathroom. You're like, wow. I wonder if there's a mimic in here. Maybe that's a mimic. Are you a mimic? You're a book. Also note that there were no, like, corners in there. So those are some of the basic tips I have for making this kind of level. It was kind of just a random assortment, a potpourri of things that occurred to me while I was playing this level, and I figured that you all might like to hear my thoughts on the matter. Another thing worth noting is that I really like this kind of notice these are the exact same as in the office, the burned out office upstairs that we saw. Exact same materials, so it really is a lot of reused textures. If you're building your textures for your materials, a lot of reused assets. If you're building your materials and assets for this sort of situation, what you want to do is, rather than think of unique assets, think about reusable assets, assets that feel like they are in a good place, regardless of how you use them, because then you can use them to spice up your levels like this and make it pretty clear that this place is lived in. It's not just stamped out from some IKEA catalog. For example, these. These really make this corner feel like it has a purpose, rather than just being a necessity of the way that the level is shaped. But these are not unique. There's one right there. So they're reused everywhere, but because they always fit into the theme of the level, you always feel like they work regardless of where you see them. That is a very powerful tool when you're building these kinds of levels, so build your assets reusably. That said, I was going to talk about this Transtar exhibit. I really like games where the explanatory text is in the game, like this. It's presented really well in the game world, and it makes sense that it would be here. This is the entryway into the Transtar company, and if you want to learn more, this is where the museum would be. It would be right next to the entrance. I think that's great. It's laid out well. It works well. It feels natural. It also had a big monster in it, which was fun. But this is much better to me than just having some kind of, you know, text dump in your inventory somewhere or whatever. This is interactive. It's bite-sized. I can choose to look at it as deeply or as shallowly as I want. I just really, really like it. A similar situation in Mass Effect Andromeda, where when you enter into the Ark, or not the Ark, the giant space station, whatever it was called, there was a cultural center identical to this right there. That one actually went upstairs, and that was a really interesting choice. I think it was probably too confusing because it actually changed the floor you were on as well as your location. Whereas this keeps you on the same floor, but it does change your location a little bit if you move through it. In general, I think that if you're going up or down stairs, or up or down a level, you need to be careful because that's very disorienting. It's especially disorienting if it's literally the first thing the player sees. Let's see. I think that was really all I wanted to talk about, except to say that these levels are great. Not just the level design. Obviously, I'm a fan of the level design because I've been talking about it for ages now. But the actual content, the models and the materials and all of this stuff is fantastic. The same with the apartment in the very beginning of the game. The Prey team that developed these levels is really good. Everything feels so sumptuous and real and unique. So total kudos to them. And I hope to see a lot more games like this with these open levels and these compelling designs and the sumptuous lived-in feel. I got a little bit of it from Deus Ex, but I just didn't feel quite right. This feels much more natural so far. Deus Ex felt like a real city, but it was a real city that I had a hard time connecting to. Similarly, the Bioshocks felt a little too directed. They didn't really feel like they were lived in. They just felt like they were roller coaster rides that you could occasionally get off and take a breather. I haven't felt a world that was this natural and open feeling since System Shock 2. And really happy. Let me know if you have any questions, and that's it.